Treaties, Soar, and Awakenings Galore. I am, as always, your host, Christopher Paul Dugdale, MEDMA. We are Duncanville High School in these United States, and today is October 30th, 2020. Now, I could talk about how tomorrow's Halloween, but instead I'm going to stick with this. On this date in history, in 1916, my grandfather was born. If he were alive today, he would probably say, "Help me, there's no air in here. I'm trapped. Help me, everybody. Help me. Help me."
Hey.
One of the tragedies about, wishing that they were alive today, wishing that they were alive, healthy, and out of the ground or uncremated. Remember when you're making wishes not to hope the other thing, because otherwise they'd probably be dead by the time you could get to them anyway. And if they're cremated, that's just mean. Happy birthday, Grandpa. Well, this is the time that everyone's been waiting for all year. Let's talk about James Monroe. Woo, 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 woo. The last of the founding fathers to run for president. Woo, 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 woo. Hey, everybody. Everybody having fun with the James Monroe? Yeah, who did? I'm not hearing anything. Oh, yeah, wait, I'm by myself. I'm not in the classroom. Well, anyway, so in 1816, you have the last time the Federalists put out a candidate. He easily won both the elections of 1816 and 1820 by large margins. In fact, if you look at it, in 1820, you only have one electoral vote not going to Jimmy Mad, which nobody called because he was James Monroe. Jimmy Mad might have been James Madison, but, he wasn't either. I don't know what I just did, But, it's October 30th. Weird things are happening, Grandpa's still dead, by the way. And tomorrow's Halloween. My ex-girlfriend's mom's birthday was on that date. Still is, I guess. I guess I didn't change, even though, we're not together. I don't know if I've bragged about it, but I'm totally with the love of my life, and that has been awesome. I've told you just how awesome Amber is. Again, if you get a chance, if anything happens to me, I can't think of a better person on earth to date. There's not. She is far superior to all of them. Well, anyway, his presidency was seen to a lot of people as a really easy presidency, but basically you almost have a civil war during his presidency. You have the first major financial problems of the nation, and anyway, so it's not quite as easy or the air of good feelings as everyone said it was. So let's go and let's examine some of those, like it's my job to do. So in Florida, Florida is a major problem. If you remember, Georgia was originally founded as a place for, as a buffer zone between the American colonies and the Spanish and Native Americans. And so it still is, and there's a bunch of Seminoles that are raiding Georgia from Florida, then sneaking back into Florida. And since that's part of Spain, sorry about that. Since it's part of Spain, this is an act of war sending in your troops there. So whenever they go in and they invade Georgia, Jackson's given permission to go out and seek out the Seminole Indians, but stay away from the Spanish. But whenever he gets there, he finds a bunch of British officers are arming the Seminole Indians. So he hangs the two British officers, and it really nearly starts a war with both Spain and Britain. And Jackson didn't have support from anyone except for John Quincy Adams, who will later on become his mortal enemy. Probably one of his mortal enemies. He had a lot of those. He was a jerk. Yeah, he's a jerk. Well, anyway, so Adams took this as an opportunity whenever he was trying to keep from, leaving Jackson out to dry, to open up contact with Spain. And Spain ends up selling all of Florida to the U.S. for $5 million, but also sets boundaries for the Louisiana Territory, so that the U.S. no longer has a claim to all of them. So it actually turns out to be a real positive. But here's where you see the great diplomat Adams getting to work. Now this leads us to the Panic of 1819. It's a panic, so I need to get you in the feeling of a panic. Okay? So the price of cotton drops from 32 cents a bushel to 14.3 cents, which is a major drop. And there's also not as much need for U.S. goods. People that owed money, their loans were foreclosed on, their land was taken away. And a lot of the problems have to do with state banks printing money still, because there were still concerns over whether or not the Bank of the U.S. would stay in power. So state banks printed out money without anything to back them. So they had no value. People couldn't pay debts with them. And people are buying, selling land quickly for a profit. So this is the first real major financial problem in the United States. And FYI, we have a crippling financial time period. About every 20 years, you have some type of an event. Now, this one was caused by COVID, but most of the time it's from things you can't always see coming. So, just FYI, expect these and try to never spend every penny you make all the time. Build up some type of savings so that, if a panic does come, it's not crippling. The Talmadge Amendment. This came from the state of Missouri, and the goal was to prevent slaves from entering after 1819 and to work for the gradual emancipation of all slaves. And it was actually passed by the House of Representatives, but not by the Senate. The Senate's going to have the power to block any major anti-slavery legislation. And what you're going to see at some point here in the next couple of years, in the 1820s, is what's called as the gag resolution, where no one is allowed to talk about slavery issues in Congress because they're just so... It almost starts a war, which as well it should, But we'll get into that soon enough. Okay? So, the Missouri Compromise is really an attempt to satiate all the slavery and anti-slavery groups to prevent slavery from expanding. Okay? So at the very surface, Missouri Compromise admits Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free state. Okay? But the second thing it does is it bans all slavery north of the Missouri southern border, which is 36 degrees 30 minutes. Okay? Now, here's a little lesson on latitude and longitude from me. Okay? So if you're trying to find your location, I know most of you have, either have a smartphone, have seen a smartphone, and it will tell you your latitude and longitude. But if you go by your latitude and longitude, that one point, is actually going to be 60 by 60 miles. So if you're somewhere and you're like, hey, Mr. Dugdale, can you go pick me up? And you say, I'm within 60 miles of this location right now here. That is a horrible way of telling someone where you are. So, and by the way, I get 60 by dividing 25,000 miles, which is the circumference of the Earth, by 360 degrees. So that ends up being about 62 miles. But let's, for our purposes, 60 miles is a nice round number to work with. So we'll try and break that down further. Instead of going 60 miles by 60 miles, we're going to break it up into minutes. Okay? And so there's 60 minutes in 1 degree. So then if I told you to come and pick me up, and you had to pick me up, and I could tell you that I'm within 1 mile of that location, in each direction, well, that's a lot more palatable than 60 miles in each direction. But they further break down minutes in measurement of location by seconds. So then instead of being within 1 mile in every direction, it breaks it down to about 100 feet. Okay? And then there's also a decimal after that. But, breaking it down to within 100 feet, that's fairly safe that you'll be able to find just about anyone in that amount of space. So when you hear about latitude and longitude, remember it's broken up into degrees, minutes, and seconds. So, I just learned you something new. I don't know what the music was, but it sounded very learning. Okay, the Erie Canal. Do you care that it's designed by DeWitt Clinton? No, not really. So let's talk about what's really important about it. It connects the Great Lakes to the Hudson River, and that's pretty important for trade. Okay, uh, it was built by Irish labor. Okay, a lot of our big projects are either built by immigrants or by foreign labor. Okay, and it's paid for by New York. It's a total of 363 miles long, and it was finished in a short period of time. Okay, by 1825, but it took about 20 years to build. And when you look at how long of stretches that they had to build to connect everything together, it's pretty impressive that they were able to pull that off. Now, shipping, it reduced shipping from from 20 days to 6 days. And it made everything a lot cheaper. You could just put on a boat and basically, push that boat into the river and it would go downstream. It also cut down the time from travel from Buffalo to New York City to about 6 days as well. Now, getting back the other way, it was a lot longer, but this made getting products to New York and to get them to sea a lot quicker. Canals were important. The American Colonization Society. So, one of the questions that people had is, what do you do with the people that used to be slaves? What do you do? Do you let them go, or do you give them land, or what do you do? And so the American Colonization Society, which James Monroe was a big pusher for. In fact, Abraham Lincoln also was a member of this later on. They wanted to move free African Americans to Africa. And the whole idea was stolen from the English, who started the country of Sierra Leone, which is right next to Liberia in Africa, of a place to ship former slaves and start their own nation. The truth is, those countries are in horrible turmoil right now. If you ever heard anything about the blood diamonds, that was in Sierra Leone, but that's a problem in both countries and horrible. We'll talk about these things as we go further into the class, but man, just a terrible place to be now. My neighbor's from Liberia. He's pretty cool. He's not as cool as my neighbor from Kenya. Man, Gideon, he is like 9 men in one. We built a fence together, and man, I'm using a post hole digger like the gas powered one, and in the time that I'm going and doing a hole, he does two with a post hole digger. Man, he's an awesome man, but whenever he goes to working, my God, makes me feel bad about myself. So anyway, Liberia, the capital city of Liberia was named Monrovia for President Monroe, and it's the only capital on earth named after a U.S. leader. So, just kind of a super interesting thing, not really something you have to know. Now, the Russo-American Treaty of 1824, this is something that, most people don't really put a lot of thought into, but if you look at Russian America over on the left-hand side there, that's all land that's claimed by the Russians, although not many Russians live in that territory. And the U.S. and Russia accept a boundary for between that and the Oregon Territory of 5440. In all honesty, had we stuck to that position of 5440 for the northern boundary of Oregon and taken all of that from Great Britain, then Alaska would actually be connected to the continental United States. But it's actually cut off by by 5 degrees and 40 minutes. You learned about 40 minutes on a previous slide. Well, anyway, so the U.S. and Britain agreed to split the Oregon country, and they found this border that they accepted between themselves and Russia to the north. Now, later on, Adams' motives and his system for getting the treaty get really challenged by Jackson during the election of 1824 and also 1828. So we'll see this kind of flare back up. But we'll get to that here in just a few minutes. Now we're hitting one of the most important foreign policies in the history of the United States, the Monroe Doctrine. Okay, It's done under Monroe's presidency, but the policy is actually created by John Quincy Adams. But they call it the Monroe Doctrine because he was the president of the United States. Not John Quincy, but James Monroe. So here's what it does, and this takes a lot of chutzpah because we are still a new nation. We don't have the ability really to keep everything going in our own nation. Yet we take it on ourselves to put ourselves in charge of North and South America, which is not appreciated by North and South America. So what we told Europe, and by the way, part of this is because just about every country from Mexico all the way down to Tierra del Fuego in South America have just won their independence from Spain, except for Brazil, and I'm not even going to touch that right now. So anyway, they all have their independence, and European nations were like, no, we can't let this happen. We need to be in control of that. There's a lot of natural resources and raw materials, but the United States says, okay, all European nations are banned from interfering and intervention in Latin America. So basically, from that point forward, we said we are in charge of this part of the world. Okay? And anyway, so it's going to be a couple of years until it's challenged. This is really challenged during the American Civil War, whenever we can't stop anything. And well, anyway, we'll get to that when we get to the Civil War. Now, moving on, we have Elizabeth Blackwell. She's the first American female doctor in the United States. Now, if you're wondering who the first American female is, that's a different person. If you're wondering who the first American doctor is, also a different person. And if you're just talking about female doctors in general, not Elizabeth Blackwell, but she is the first female American doctor. Oh my God, I just made it so much easier. Someone's like, oh my God, Mr. Dougal, you said she was the first American female doctor, and now you said she's the first female American doctor. Same thing. Samuel Morse, he invents the telegraph, and this is Morse code. The first thing said on that was, what hath God wrought? And just a little thing for you, okay? If you're ever in trouble and you have your phone, okay? If you take your hand and cover up the flashlight after a 1001 count, and you do that 3 times, and then you do it after a one count, so you have 1001, 1001, 1001, 111, 1001, 1001, and 1001. And so you show the light for those short periods of time. That is SOS, which means save our ship. It's an international distress, and everyone in the military and all of your first responders are familiar with it. And if they see that and you're in a place where you don't have a cell signal, but you can get out some type of message, that's one way to do it that people would recognize. Okay? Now what happens if you mess up and you do 3 short bursts, 3 long, 3 short? Well, that's oso, and in Spanish that means spare, so they might get that too, but most likely if they see those flashes of light and they're either long or short, they're going to get the message that someone's in trouble. In 1858, they actually built a transatlantic cable, and that is a physical cable that actually goes from North America to Europe, and they're able to send messages instantaneously. So if you look at the most important inventions really in the 19th century that we're talking about, and maybe even over the last 500 years before that, it's really the telegraph and the railroad, because they change time and space. Before, if you're trying to get from one side of North America to the other, it's going to take you about, if you're moving with your family and you're moving pretty fast, it's going to take you about 12 to 18 months. But once they put in the railroad, you can get there in about 4 days. And with the with Morse code, instead of it taking 12 to 18 months to get a message across, you're now looking at about an hour. Okay? So you can get a message across in an hour. So it changes time and space for the world at the time, these 2 inventions. Okay? Not quite as important, but also important, is Cyrus McCormick. He's the guy on the right. The guy who looks like he's from Duck Dynasty or one of the hillbillies from Swamp People on the left, that is Samuel Morse. But on the right you have Cyrus McCormick, and he created the mechanical mower reaper, and this made it so you could harvest crops at a much faster rate. It did the work of 12 men or 4 women. Sorry, the women in my family work really hard, so take that, men and chauvinist attitudes. Take that. Boom! Now, during this time period, you have the Second Great Awakening, okay? And this is a religious movement, but what makes it so monumental were all the other movements that came out of it. So how important is it to know that Charles Finney was part of it? It does target women, but what really comes out of this are major movements, and one of those is going to be temperance. And temperance is a complete and total ban on alcohol, okay? And in 1918, that's actually passed and ratified by Congress, and for about 15 years, it's illegal really to have alcohol in the United States. You have asylum and prison reform. If you were someone that was put in an asylum because they believed you were crazy, then basically what they did is they chained you up and put you up with the other inmates, and many times they would be either raped or beaten to death in the cells, and there was nothing done to try and treat their conditions. Prison reform, you still have debtors' prisons in the United States, so if you owed money and you didn't pay it, they put you in jail until you paid off your debt. Okay, and that was all a deterrent for getting people to make sure they paid their debts. Abolition, the movement to end and abolish slavery, was passed during this time. Also, you have attempts at women's rights, the voting right, and equality, which is something that's still moving forward, and also reform in education, which, really that's something we need to address again. I mean, you have zero voice from students and zero voice from teachers, but a lot of people who don't teach, creating policy for what happens in the classroom. And not only that, we're on an archaic system that was created about 170 years ago, where school starts in, around September or the end of August and goes until May. And we really should move to more of a year-round schooling where we're not really adding days to it, but we're moving around the calendar. So instead of having, 2.5 months where you're laying idle and your brain's just atrophying, you're going to school 9 weeks on, 4 weeks off. And that gives you a chance to kind of have a recovery period between each semester where you can make up courses. And as far as babysitting and everything like that, the world would adapt if we changed the system. Okay? And you'd be able to go on more vacations throughout the year. So September and June, or March and even December at this point, you'd have a longer time period to go and actually live the world, instead of just kind of having everything pigeonholed into the summer, and all prices are gouged during that time. I just have always felt like we should update education to go to more of a model that makes sense. You could even do 6 on, 3 off. I mean, there's a bunch of different variations there. But the easiest and laziest way to do that is 9 weeks on and 4 weeks off. Anyway, moving on. So the election of 1824. Okay. Now, one thing we haven't talked about so far is the fact that a stepping stone to become the president was the Secretary of State. Okay. Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe were all secretaries of state before they became president. So it wasn't the vice president that made it so that you can move into the presidency. It was actually the Secretary of State that made you a more viable position. Okay, so you had 4 major candidates. You had Henry Clay, Andrew Jackson, John Quincy Adams, and Henry Crawford. Okay, so to win the presidency, you don't need a plurality. You need a majority. So whenever the votes are counted, you have 99 votes with Jackson, you have 84 votes with Adams, 41 with Crawford, and 37 with Clay. Now, Jackson has a clear plurality. So he has a plurality of the votes, but he doesn't have a majority. And when you don't have a majority, then that goes, instead of being decided there, it's decided by Congress. Okay, so let's see, how many more votes did he need? He needed 33 more votes, so that's a pretty significant amount. So the Electoral College goes to decide, and the House of Representatives ultimately will decide this. Okay, and again, he had the most votes, but when it goes to the House of Representatives, they take the top three vote getters. So that is Jackson, Adams, and Crawford. But Crawford has a massive stroke, so he's taken out of the running. And Clay has the fourth most votes. So basically what he can do is he has the ability to throw all of his weight behind someone else. Okay, and he decides to go with Adams. You know, the world would have been a better place had Jackson not been president. Okay, it'd probably be a better place today, and it definitely would have been back then. I hate Jackson, so I may have some type of bias. But anyway, that's what you're looking at. When Adams is elected, he makes Clay his Secretary of State, which, remember, is the stepping stone to become the next president. And so Adams has won the presidency in an election where he didn't have, the most votes, or even close to the most votes. And this was the first time where you actually had all of the electoral vote actually counted and recorded. So from this point forward, you know exactly how many people voted for you. So, as a consequence of this, Andrew Jackson's going to start the Democratic Party. He calls what Adams and Clay did a corrupt bargain, and he is against the Democratic Republicans, especially Adams and Clay, and he starts this party. A local newspaper editor calls him a jackass, so he uses a donkey to be a symbol of the Democratic Party. So it actually goes back to Jackson, the founder of the party, as to why the symbol of the party is the donkey. So we're going to see a horrible fight coming up next class. So kind of like 2016. This brings us to the end of today. So I hope everyone has a safe day. Don't do cocaine. And please don't punch any puppies in the face. I'll see you all on the other side. Have a great day.